Good afternoon. Take a breath. Y'all are at the end of the day. I am hoping that we will continue to be in good relationship and that you continue to take care of yourself, even for this last hour. Before we get started, I am going to ask everyone to stand up because why not, right? And so I can land in this space. I'm sure many of you have been here all day. So I can land as well as so we can transition into this topic of restorative practice. I'm going to invite y'all into a check-in. And we're just going to do it standing because y'all will be seated for a good amount of time. So when you're ready, I'm just going to invite you to take a look around the room, like just looking, observing, noticing both the awkward gazes, the internal feeling of what it looks like, just to kind of observe. But notice colors, notice people, notice objects. Take your time. You might even slow it down a bit. If something catches your attention, let it linger for a moment. And then when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to now just kind of bring your awareness to the sense of sound. So, of course, you hear my voice. If it's helpful, you might invite yourself to close your eyes if that feels safe. Otherwise, just find something to focus on and take note of sound. The hum of the air condition. Steps. And then as you notice that sense of sound, I'm going to invite you to check in with your physical body. So just notice the parts of your body that are making contact with the other. Notice sensation of the body when it comes to temperature. Notice if the body's feeling relaxed right now, but just kind of notice how's the body feeling. You might even notice that you'd want to support the body by shifting something because during that check-in, it came to your awareness. And then this next one, bring your awareness to the top of your mind and just notice what thoughts are there. Attempting not to make any judgment. You might be thinking about what came before this or what came after. You might be thinking about this very moment as I'm guiding. But what thoughts are on the top of the mind? And as I observe, and I'm in this practice with you, I notice that some people may have stopped breathing. So take a breath and check in with your energy. Just like, how is it right now? Is it feeling fatigued or is it feeling high, scattered, settled? And then when you're ready, asking that question, how am I based on what I just explored? And then how can I best support myself in this moment based on what I know? And so if you notice the body was feeling a certain way, you may move it. You might notice that you want to change locations. You might want to take a breath, but notice. And then whatever you need to do for the next 30 seconds to support yourself and to settle in, I'm going to invite you to do that. Something was on the top of the mind, you need to send a text message, you might need to do that, right? If you need to refill on water, it might be helpful to do that. But when you're ready, take the next 15 seconds and then begin to get settled. You can take a seat when you're ready. So my question is, how are you all? Like, what's present for you right now? And I'm going to invite you just to really say it out loud in a very informal way, in whatever way it feels supportive, but like maybe one word that describes what's present for you. How are you? Peaceful. And just because we started with peaceful, not everyone has to say peaceful or calm. I appreciate peaceful though. Awake, motivated, relaxed, exhausted, tired, breathless, restless, or breathless. Breath. Okay. Support yourself. Yeah. Okay, about 2 or 3 more. Sleepy. Aware. Okay. So, and I am present. And so thank you for that. So what we just did was aspects of experience. One thing that we know is that our relationship with ourselves then determines our relationship with those that are in our spheres of influence and in our environment. And so what we just did was this check-in and aspects of experience. When people usually ask us how we are, what is our automatic response? Good. How are you? Right? Autopilot. What else? Okay. Good. Okay. If you're working with youth in like a middle school or a high school, it might be all right. And then the other two that I hear and that we hear is exhausted and tired. Exhausted, tired, good, great, okay, right? And we do that many times, and I'm sure you already know this, is because of time or relationship. Or we might not be in a deep relationship with someone. So we're like, we don't want them to know this. Or if we're in a group, we don't know everyone in the group. So we settle for what comes naturally. Nobody's going to ask about if we're good, great, tired, fatigued, exhausted, because it's something that we can relate with, right? And so the practice of checking in and being really honest is our practice of really showing up just as we are without any judgment. And so sometimes when we say good, it means that I am physically here and accounted for, right? My physical body has shown up. And sometimes we forget about all the 5 other aspects. So aspects of experience is checking in with our physical body. So this vessel that we walk around with, how is it? Is it relaxed? Is it alert? Does my shoulder hurt? Does my stomach hurt? How is my body after I just took in this substance, right? Like what's my reaction? How is my body? The mental is what's my mind body? What's happening in my mind body? What thoughts are present? You know, is it negative self-talk? Is it positive self-talk? Am I thinking about the thing that happened yesterday? Am I anticipating and thinking about the thing that happens tomorrow? Am I ruminating? Is my mind steady or is it full, right? How many of you all have one thought at a time, right? But how many of us have many thoughts at a time? Right? All of us. And so our practice is really checking in. How's my mental? Emotional. How's my heart? How's my emotions? And then realizing that we can experience more than one emotion at a time, right? We can be happy. We can be sad at the same time. We can be excited and nervous. We can be in a space of joy or in a space of pain, and that all of them are valid. And so it's an opportunity to check in with what and how is my heart experiencing this moment right now? Breath. How's my energy? We'll talk a little bit more about breath throughout this practice, but the invitation to really check in with how we're showing up based on how our breath is flowing, based on the way that our breath is regulating our nervous system or not. And so really giving ourselves an opportunity to check in with that. And that last part, one of the most important parts, which I'm going to invite us into during our time together, is that space of intellect and wisdom. It's that idea and that knowing that we are our own greatest teacher. And that if we are able to simply really check in with who we are and our humanity and our identity, we will know what the next step is for ourselves. And so it's building that trust with our intellect and our wisdom based on what those other aspects of experience are sharing with us. So that right there is basically just a practice, and we've done this already. But this is just a check-in. I just kind of really want to know who's in the room because that'll help guide. I'm sure that there's very different experiences, but relationship with substance abuse. What professions do we have in here? Giving yourself an opportunity just to say that aloud, if that feels comfortable, and if allowing yourself just to name and give yourself your own role. Who do we have here? Yeah. Cool. So organizers. Nice. Counselors, any LPCs? Yeah. Parents. Okay. Okay. So I know who I'm talking to. Thank you. So I'm bringing up a lot of the work. So she read that very beautiful bio, and I just kind of want to name with what we're going to really land on today. And so as we bring in the concepts and the experiences of substance abuse, it's important that we acknowledge our experiences with mental health, right? And so I think one key subject and point that we always that's helpful to make is that mental health touches all of us, right? And our experience with mental health not just maybe touches us, but the people that are in our environments. And so as we go into our time together today, I'm going to invite in putting on that cap and that experience as of a human, right? So really bringing in that I'm showing up here because what I might use here, I know being a human is a little hard to guys see a face. Being a little human it can be challenging. But the fact that what we will be taking in today, I'm going to invite you not just to use it in your own personal life, but in your work environments, in your relationships that show up, whether it's the person that is the stranger at the store, the person in which you might be guiding or facilitating something for, your role as a parent, but bringing in the idea that these are tools that are just simple self tools to be in better relationship. Because we never know what is happening in anyone's lives that are around us. And the more that we practice being in good relationship, the more we have an opportunity to then see people, feel people, hear people, and then begin to manage this idea of mental health, this experience of mental health, and all of the behaviors that then come with that. So I'm not going to go through all the statistics, but we do know that 1 in 4 people are managing mental health, right? And so really allowing ourselves to be in that space. When it comes to restorative practices and substance abuse, the things that are most important, I didn't name everything, but some things that it's important for us to keep in mind of why we may move into restorative practices, and I'll define that in a moment, is that it's fundamentally a compulsive behavior, right? And that might mean that we might be doing things in autopilot. It's a behavior in which we may not be managing. And then it's usually initiated outside of consciousness. So when we talk about those 5 aspects of experience, it's that space outside of the intellect in the wisdom, but also in relationship, because intellect and wisdom ebbs and flows. Our physical experience ebbs and flows. Our mental experience ebbs and flows. So it's inviting into our presence and our wholeness. And then as we talk about the different practices, we know that the more individualized and broad-based the treatment, the better the outcome. And so really thinking about how can we have a broad range of practices to begin to really address the effects and the symptoms of mental health. And the last one's the most important, is that change takes time for anything and everything that we do, but specifically in changing a behavior. And so that's when that patience comes in. So when we talk about trauma, and one thing that I like to kind of really bring in is the idea of mental health, trauma, and then secondary trauma, and the way that they not just relate, but really name in the same experience of how the body lands. And so with trauma, the word Sanskrit is, of course, my background is in yogic philosophy, so that's why we're bringing in the Sanskrit term of trauma. But it comes from the word ama, meaning undigested, unresolved, and unprocessed. And so I'm just going to land with that. And so when we're undissolved, unprocessed, and undigested, that's like it takes us away from our wholeness in that moment. That experience is that we are moving through something. And that trauma is a painful emotional experience caused by an event or an experience that challenges our sense of safety. When we think about what happens when our sense of safety is challenged, there's that mind-body impairment. We step outside of our body, we lose our senses. And so in that beginning of our time together, that call to senses, where am I physically in this moment? What do I hear in this moment? What do I taste? What do I feel? It's a direct action to just being in response to trauma in a way that puts us back in our bodies. And then we have vicarious trauma, which is, of course, our secondary experience to hearing. And so as we move into this space today, for those of you that, and I think it's still with all of us, but for those of you that are serving in the capacities of caretakers or facilitators, both ones that have experience of substance abuse, as well as those that are holding that space and in between, I'm going to invite you to put on that, once again, that hat of what is my experience, and then checking in with how is it showing up for me, and then how can we use these practices to care for me in all of those various roles. And so as we step in today, and name secondary trauma, we know that compassion fatigue shows up with physical and emotional exhaustion. It may show up with the opportunity of disconnection or tuning out what's happening right in front of us. It may mean in the home life, disconnection from personal relationship. We know what all of those land in. So I won't kind of need into that. But the fact is that it just leads to distress, right? And then we move into burnout, whether from the experience or taking in the experience. So as we move into today, what's the solution? Like, how do we really allow ourselves to begin to move from both the experience of abuse and then also of the vicarious trauma? So we move with what the ABCs are. The ABCs of managing, the first one being awareness. So as we go into awareness, building the capacity to really allow ourselves to know what trauma looks like in our bodies, both trauma and vicarious trauma. What does it look like in our bodies? How does it feel in our bodies? How does it affect our daily habits? The awareness of building that knowledge and being aware of our work and our experience is really the way that we begin to bring impact. Because when we're aware, that means that we've acknowledged. And when we acknowledge, we then have an opportunity to accept. And so one definition that I like to always bring in is that simple concept of stress. When you think of stress, it's tension, right? It's tension, it's pressure. It may feel like some friction is happening. It brings feelings of frustration. And so the practice there is that the definition in which we usually land on in the restorative space is that it's a mental habit between what we want to be happening, like what should be happening, versus what's actually happening. So it's the gray matter. And the key word there is that it's a mental habit between what is happening in reality versus what we want to be happening. And so when we have that mental habit, because it's a mental habit, it means that it's a behavior that can be changed. And so when we are aware and have an opportunity to accept, our practice is that we then begin to move forward with clarity versus the friction. And then we have balance. So giving ourselves an opportunity to find balance and connection in our lives. And that's where we're going to really bring in the idea of restorative practice. So the most widely and effective way to managing substance abuse as well as vicarious trauma, there's 3 keys that we tend to do along with awareness, balance, and connection. Of course, the first is building awareness. The second one is creating solid individual prevention and resiliency groups and practices, also known as like self-care practices. The third one, then creating spaces of connection, specifically within collective and organizational systems. And our practice there, and what is encouraged, is that they begin to be collective care plans. But if anyone's ever tried to change an organization, it takes time, right? It also begins to then take shared responsibility. And so those things of restorative practice, they don't necessarily happen overnight. And so that's what we're going to land at today. And so when we talk about self-care, the definition of restorative practices is it's really a social science that we then begin to build healthy relationship, right? And so we know that relationship takes time. So our practice with restorative, our practice when using and creating restorative practices is that we have to really get to the root of the root of the issues or the root of the experiences or the root of the behaviors that are at the source of what is happening in each individual's lives. And so thinking about whether you're a practitioner, a participant, a peer, advisor in a group, it's really getting to the root of what behavior is occurring, whether it's the substance abuse and or the vicarious trauma. And so when we get to the root, we begin to find an opportunity to then really invite ourselves into what do I need to really change or shift this behavior over time, and who do I need to do it with? And so with the self-care practices, that's where we bring in the 6 practices of self-care: physical, mental, emotional, practical, social, and spiritual. And so my question, and this is just a question thinking about what's happening in your world in this moment, when you say, how am I? And you think about your response, how is my mind right now as I'm going through this work and I'm going through these experiences? What thoughts tend to come up in my mind? How's my heart? What feelings and emotions are there? And how can I care for them? How's my practical self-care? How am I taking care of my needs on an everyday basis? Am I taking care of my needs on an everyday basis? Or at least every other day in moments? How's my social support? And so one thing that we know is that when we are in moments of trauma or in moments of isolation, which is one of the pillars of prevention when it comes to social abuse, substance abuse, is moving away from isolation and building community. So the question there is, who is in my social support? Whether it's a practitioner, naming their family, naming their spouse, naming their best friend, but who are the people that you go to? And then spiritual, what are the things that you're doing to really take care of your heart and your energy? Whether it be faith-based, whether it be moving into reading text, is it meditation? Is it prayer? So really identifying the 6 types of self-care that one may involve in. And so that brings us to this definition of mindfulness. And so I always say that whenever we're in this field, mindfulness is a big key word right now, right? We have so much mindfulness happening. And so really what mindfulness is, outside of our calm space and relaxed space, but it's just simply paying attention and being present to bodily sensations, to what's happening in the moment, in our mood, in our environment, and then with all aspects of our experience, and doing it with an attitude of curiosity, compassion, and acceptance. And the beauty with that is that we're experiencing and acknowledging both the pleasant and the unpleasant experiences that are happening and occurring without judging them. So it's the practice of, I'm not really having a great day today, and I'm okay with that, right? Things aren't actually going the way that I thought that they were, and I'm okay with that. And so our practice with mindfulness is being okay with what's happening in the moment. So we once again create that space of clarity to move to the next. And when we practice the sense of mindfulness, we get an opportunity to then transform feelings that are many times tied to substance abuse or trauma or stress, the shame, there's guilt, there's, we might even name the hopelessness, because we begin to accept it for what is happening in the humanity of our experience. And so our practice is just simply being aware. And so restorative practices, as we build relationships, it's the question of, so how do we take moments of checking in, or why do we even take moments of checking in? And the first one is because it gives us an opportunity to reestablish safety and support. So trauma is that opportunity of when we might feel unsafe. So our practice is to check in so we can reestablish the safety and the support, whether it's coming back into our bodies or coming back into our experience, coming back into our now. It's developing emotional regulation skills, right? If we ride the wave enough and feel what it feels like to ride a wave, whether it's of anger or shame or guilt, if we ride it from the beginning to the end, we might actually build a muscle of riding that wave without any judgment, without any acceptance. So we actually get to the end of the wave. And so we do this thing with many of our programs when it comes to really addressing trauma. And it's this practice of riding the wave, learning to breathe through what's happening, gaining the skills of relaxing through what's happening, which is the self-regulation skills, giving our opportunity to feel what's happening, giving our opportunity to watch it. So really watch how whatever we're experiencing is moving through our body, just as if we were watching a friend. And then also allowing sensations to occur rather than to invite ourselves into avoidance or resistance. And so the practice here when it comes to restoration is restorative means that we are rebuilding. We are allowing ourselves to build resilience in a way that allows us to really touch into the wholeness of who we are, regardless of the experiences that occur. And that's what we know is resilience. It's not that we keep doing the same thing all the time. It's that we begin to acknowledge how we're responding and build the skills to move through it. And so when we think about like feelings and check-in, so why is it important to check in? Because we give ourselves an opportunity to then notice what we need to do to get and build resilience. Has anybody ever said that they're angry? And then we ask you, like, how are you? And you're like, I'm angry. Or no, sorry, wrong way. Like, I'm good. And you're like burning inside. Or if somebody asks you, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm good. And something terrible just happened before. And thinking about that within when you're in a relationship. And so the practice is to get really honest with what is happening in the moment. So then we work together, or at least you work with yourself to actually move through that feeling and that experience. And that's how we cultivate moments. So 3 steps to becoming aware. And just these are things that you can do. Taking a moment to observe in the middle of full days, in the middles of back-to-back groups, in the middle of transitions, take a moment to observe how you're feeling at the end of your day, at the beginning of your day. Taking a moment and observing, and then getting curious and ask, what's the root of what's happening right now? Where is it coming from? And then acknowledging and acting. So these are 3 steps. And by acknowledge and act, it's that simple of checking in and then doing the thing that will meet the need right now. That meets the need of self-care. And this may look like one of these formal practices. So our practice is, how do we practice awareness, right? We don't practice awareness technically. We practice getting good at staying present in the moments. We practice building the muscle of riding the wave. And so these are formal practices that that mindful-based restorative practices really land on. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to highlight breath and the senses, specifically when it comes to staying in the moment and anchoring into our body, into our breath. Really feeling into our human experience. And so the one thing that we know about our breath is that it stabilizes our nervous system. It places us in our space of restoration and relaxation, and allows us to calm and bring ourselves back into consciousness if we sit with it just for even a few moments. And so we'll go through that, but then we have our 5 senses, which we've already touched on, but these are all different ways. It's focusing our attention on external objects, focusing our attention on words and text, focusing our attention on physical body sensations. Sometimes you might even call this like meditations. These might call them mindful moments. But thinking about how good are we with sitting with ourselves? And then see how that translates with how good are we with sitting with others. So as we move into this, what it means to sit with ourselves and then move into how does it show up in collective spaces? we know that social connection is the thing that really supports us, right? We know that social connection is the thing that makes us and invites us into wholeness and enjoy. And so when we think about mindful communication, it's the practice of listening with presence, intention, and attention to not just yourself, but then also to others. And so thinking about, and this is a self-inquiry question, how good am I at really listening? Active listening, hearing what's said. And so as you think about that, the practice of mindful communication is to really create an opportunity for us to create spaces in which people feel seen, people feel heard, and people feel supported. And as people feel seen, felt, and heard, it means that I'm here, that I'm present, that I'm valued, that I'm worthy. But sometimes many of our day-to-day operations don't allow for that time, even if it's carved out space, because something outside of that space is happening and occurring. And so our practice here is to really arrive when we're in one-to-one communication or we're in group communication. And so 3 steps of when it comes to clearing or comes to mindful communication, the first one is clearing to arrive. And what that means is that we begin to clear our space to fully arrive in whatever conversation one may be entering, whatever group one may be entering, whatever meeting one may be entering. And that might look like there's 3 different sections of clearing. The first one is physical. So earlier today, you might have moved, you might have moved your body, you checked in, your body might needed to move location or needed a drink of water. So how can you clear to arrive through your physical body? And one of the practices too is clearing to arrive. Notice those opportunities when you're kind of like slumped over in a group, right? Like, what am I sharing with you all through this right now? Boredom, right? So if I want to be alert, if I want to be engaged in my group, I might actually like shoulders back, right? So that's a clearing. So thinking about ways that what are the things that I can do to clear my space to fully arrive in presence with what's in front of me. Mindful talk is using candor, feedback, in communication to be in real connection. So being real connection through compassion, meaning that you're showing up in a space of kindness. You're showing up in a space of friendliness. You're showing up in a space of really allowing one to be heard and understood. Curiosity, showing up without judgment and offering even feedback without judgment. And then also commitment. So really moving through communication, even when it's challenging, even when it takes us to a space of vulnerability. And so giving ourselves an opportunity to be committed from the beginning to the end and using self-regulation tools to even get there. And then the last one is active listening, intentionally listening to those in which you're working with, but also intentionally listening in the spaces and one-on-one conversations. So maybe then we're paraphrasing what is then said back to us. We might actually even just reflect, but giving ourselves an opportunity to be fully present when it comes to building relationship with each other. And so one practice that we have really landed off, and so this is where we're going to get moving a little bit, but creative expression. And so if we're mindfully communicating, and when we mindfully communicate, it means that something needs to be heard. Yeah, like we're creating space for listening. And so with creative expression, it's one thing that we tend to miss many times when it comes to relationship and social connection. And one of the tools for balancing, well, 3 of the tools for balancing that we'll land on is guided drawing. So we know that when we're experiencing stress or trauma, there's a sense of hopelessness that can be experienced. There also can be quite the opposite. And so guided drawing is giving us ourselves an opportunity to self-express in a way that allows us to access what's actually unconscious. So thinking about artists, thinking about music, thinking about dancing, thinking about all of the things that we use to creatively express what's happening in our bodies. And so guided drawing is a way. And so this is something that I encourage people to do either in their own time or in group spaces. And so the three questions or the three prompts that we tend to use when it comes to guided drawing are, who am I now? Who do I want to become? And then drawing, how am I going to get there? And what it looks like is giving 5 to 7 minutes of free write. Who am I now? Who do I want to become? And how am I going to get there? And then in guided drawing, giving us of yourself an opportunity to then have that space of sharing the experience. The second one is shaking, moving, and dancing. So we know that our body is the soil of our experience. It holds. When we are stressed, where do we feel it? Neck, shoulders. We feel it though, right? It's because it's stored in our body. And so thinking about how that's stored, our practice is set to release it. And so giving ourselves an opportunity to move the body and allow ourselves to just let it release. And then guided imagery, using visualization and guided script to enhance inner dialogue and safety. And what that is encouraging storytelling, encouraging narrative, encouraging writing your own story and experience. And both of those three, I encourage these being done individually, but also being done in group settings that have spaces of community agreement set, that are agreed upon about those that are all inside of the practice. And then also ending with a space of verbal expression and sharing your experience. And I think the practice here too is when we creatively express, we balance both the equanimity of our experience of what's happening in reality and that other part of either what's happening in the past or the future, but we begin to kind of find that balance of connection of what's happening now and can I be with that now? And then begin to create a path and a vision for future self. Okay. So I'm gonna invite y'all to get up and stand. This is gonna be one of our practices. And just taking this with you. And so bring your body, just kind of landed, give yourself some space. We're going to move into this practice of moving. And so I invite you to listen to your body, but I also invite you just to kind of let go of the focus of thinking too much about this, okay? When you are ready and when you begin to hear the sound of the music, I'm going to invite you and I'm going to guide through movement. And so as you get started, just take a breath and begin to let it out. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So just give yourself an opportunity to tap the feet. Just gonna move the body. And then begin to move the legs. You might move the knees. If it's helpful, find something to focus on. So now that you know that everyone's doing the same thing that you're doing, Give yourself an opportunity, begin to settle in. Checking in with your breath. Notice how the mind begins to move. Begin to find movement and shaking in the fingers, in the wrist. And just allow yourself to continue to move into it. Just move it your own way. Begin to move towards the elbows. Notice how the body wants to sometimes even stand still. Shoulders. Maybe the right shoulder and the left shoulder. See if you can find one thing to focus on, if the eyes are still open. Just begin to shake the whole body in whatever way that feels supportive, but see if you can just let yourself move. Elbows, we're still moving. I'm not gonna give it time. I'm just gonna invite you to move. You might even move quicker, or you might even slow it down. If you wanna move hands in a different direction, that's an option too. Take a breath. And then when you're ready, pause. And just find something to focus on, close your eyes, and just kind of notice your breath. Notice the thoughts that are at the top of the mind. Notice sensation of the body. And then now I'm going to invite you to move in whatever way feels right to you. Just how was that experience for you in truth and honesty? Yeah, relaxing. It's giving yourself an opportunity to acknowledge. And then when you're ready, take a seat. Okay. So we get close. We use this to really kind of wind down our time. So how was that experience? One was relaxing. And truth and honesty, how was that experience? Awkward. Yeah. Can you share more? Do you feel comfortable sharing more? Yeah.
Seeing what other people are doing,
Yeah.
being self-conscious.
Being self-conscious. Yeah. Was anybody else self-conscious? Yeah, right? Yeah. What else? That's real. Thank you. How else was that? How was that?
So
Playful, right? There can be joy, right? I love Bob Marley, right? He is in it. Does anybody notice a difference in how they feel?
someone online,
More relaxed,
it was relaxing and grounding.
relaxing and grounding, calms the mind, lively, more energy, brought back good memories. So I land with it doesn't all have to be pleasant. Anybody have not that experience? Huh? No? Yeah. So what we know is that our body holds our experience. And I'm going to encourage what we know about these three practices, both moving the body, both shaking. Imagine if you did, I'm going to invite you to do this for like 3 minutes every day. Turn on some music and just let your body move. If you are holding a group, I invite you not just to be in this your own personal practice, but also be in the freedom of moving your body, not necessarily constricted movement or controlled movement, not necessarily even an exercise class. We know that those things work, but freely moving our bodies is not just a way to connect with like what's being stored in it, but it's also a way to then release and trust our own intellect and wisdom. Because we begin to move. If everybody else is moving and I'm not the only one, I'm going to move. Like you begin to build relationship with your mind, your body, your heart, your breath, all in one time. And it all comes to the forefront. And then we also do it without thought. And so that's really many times what a restorative practice space is, that we are all participants of finding freedom in our mind, finding connection in our body, and then finding hope for a future without any judgment. Is that we are building relationship. And so it's practices like this that give us an opportunity to then find that similarity that all of us can connect to. And so I was hearing too, when we talk about, so it's creative expression, and we've done all that. So creative expression is that way of practices that allow us to move into greater relationship within even group settings, because it brings that relationship with ourselves and that relationship with others. But it's how do we create environments where people can actually experience that freedom and participate in our own individual healing processes or self-care processes and building that empowerment. And so ending with this, acknowledging, taking a moment to tune into every present moment experience. Thinking about how you felt when we were present moment moving and shaking our body, what should stay and what may actually need to go. What's helpful and what's unhelpful for showing up in our full humanity without any bias, without any preconceived notions, but as just as we are, so we can see what's in front of us and we can see who we are. Sharing responsibility, gathering with individuals to share the collective responsibility to create restorative practices. Working with the people that are in the programs as well as the people that are supporting the programs. How can we create an environment in which everyone can show up just as they are and take a participatory role in their practice? Mindful communication, creating a space to listen and find ways to express ourselves and our experiences. What forms of community agreements need to be there? What forms need to be practiced? And then getting clear and creative. So thinking about solutions. So the creative expression, mindful practices, group support, all ways to really work collectively, and then seeking resources. So really engaging our family, friends, colleagues, community to learn more about what it means to create more restorative practices. And so as we land there, the act of practicing our own daily habits on a daily basis to better attain physical and mental health outcomes so that instead of just surviving, we are thriving. And so just thinking about ways where we can continue to take care of our own well-being and whatever roles we are showing, so then we can continue to create spaces where wellness thrives and we're not just moving through each and every day. So with that, I'm going to land. If you're interested in knowing any practicing restorative practices, I'm located right down the street. We do a lot of work within the school districts, but a lot of the practices that we offer are practicing community building circles, practicing ways to creatively express, practicing ways to be in communication, but really also just practicing self-care habits to truly show up and getting to the root of what's happening in our own experiences. So I'm around for questions if you all have any at the end, but other than that, thank y'all. Yeah.